The sun was sinking behind the ridge of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that only a New Mexico evening could offer. Margaret Ann Calloway stood on the porch of her small ranch house, watching the colors shift and melt into one another like watercolors left in the rain. She held a cup of black coffee in both hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers, though the evening was not particularly cold. It was a habit she had carried since her husband died 7 years ago, standing on this same porch, watching the same sky, holding the same cup as if it were the hand of someone who was no longer there. She was 53 years old. Her hair, once the color of dark honey, had turned to silver at the temples and faded to a softer shade everywhere else. Lines marked the corners of her eyes and the edges of her mouth, each one earned honestly through years of laughter, grief, wind, and sun. She had stopped looking in mirrors with any kind of expectation long ago. She knew what she was. She was a woman who had lived, and living had left its fingerprints all over her. That was the evening Jack Dawson rode onto her property for the first time. He came on horseback, which was unusual enough in an age when most people arrived in pickup trucks with cracked windshields and country music bleeding from the speakers. But Jack rode a tall buckskin mare with a calm, rolling gait, and he sat in the saddle the way some men sit in church pews, as though he had been born there and saw no reason to be anywhere else. He wore a dust-colored hat pulled low against the fading light, and when he tipped it back to look at her, she saw eyes the color of a creek bed after rain, somewhere between green and gray, with flecks of gold that caught the last of the sun. He was 36 years old. She would learn this later, though she suspected it from the start. There was a youthfulness in the way he moved, an ease in his body that had not yet learned the language of surrender. But there was also something older in his eyes, something that told her he had already seen a few things that most men his age had been lucky enough to avoid. He asked if she needed help with her fence line. He had heard in town that she was running the ranch alone and that the winter storms had taken down nearly a quarter-mile of fencing along the eastern pasture. She told him she could not afford to pay much. He told her he was not asking for much, and so it began. For 3 weeks, Jack worked on her property. He arrived each morning before the sun was fully up, and he worked until the light gave out. He mended fences, repaired the barn door that had been hanging crooked for 2 years, cleared the irrigation ditch that fed the small alfalfa field, and replaced the rotting boards on the porch where she stood each evening. He ate lunch under the cottonwood tree near the well, and sometimes she brought him iced tea and sat with him, and that talked about the things that people talk about when they are circling something larger than conversation. He told her about his years on the rodeo circuit, the broken bones, and the small towns, and the women who loved cowboys until they realized what loving a cowboy actually meant. He told her about the ranch he had lost in Montana to a banker who had never set foot on a piece of land that was not paved. He told her about the long drive south, following the sun because he had nothing else left to follow. She told him about Robert, her husband, who had been a quiet man with strong hands and a gentle voice, who had died of a heart attack in the very field Jack was now mending fences around. She told him about her 2 grown children who lived in cities and called on Sundays with voices full of love and guilt in equal measure. She told him about the loneliness that had settled into her bones like an old injury that ached when the weather changed. She did not tell him that she had begun to look forward to his arrival each morning with a feeling she had not experienced in years, a fluttering, reckless anticipation that made her feel foolish and alive at the same time. She did not tell him that when he looked at her, she forgot the number that defined her age and remembered only the woman who still lived somewhere beneath the silver hair and the sun-worn skin. But she was not a fool. She had lived too long and lost too much to be a fool. It happened on a Thursday evening. The fence was nearly finished, and they both knew that the end of the work meant the end of the reason for him to be there. They were sitting on the newly repaired porch, watching the sky perform its nightly masterpiece, and the silence between them had shifted from comfortable to charged, the way the air changes before a thunderstorm. He reached over and took her hand, just like that. No preamble, no excuse. He simply wrapped his rough, calloused hands around hers and held on as though he had been waiting 3 weeks to do exactly that. She felt the warmth of his palm against hers, and something inside her cracked open like dry earth receiving rain. She pulled her hand away, not sharply, but deliberately, the way you close a book you are not ready to finish. "Jack," she said, and her voice was steady even though her heart was not. "I am too old for you." She said it plainly, without drama or self-pity, because it was a fact, and she always respected facts, even when they were inconvenient. 17 years stood between them. She had been graduating high school when he was learning to walk. She had been burying her husband when he was still chasing belt buckles on the rodeo circuit. The math did not work, and she had always been good at math. He did not argue with her. He did not list the reasons why she was wrong or deliver a speech about how age was just a number. He did not do any of the things she expected him to do. Instead, he leaned over slowly, giving her every opportunity to turn away, and he kissed her. It was the softest kiss she had ever received, softer than any kiss Robert had given her, though she loved Robert and would love him until the day she joined him in whatever came after this life. Jack's kiss was soft because it was careful, because it understood that it was asking permission and offering a promise at the same time. When he pulled back, his face was close to hers and she could see every detail of him in the dying light. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened when he was holding back something important, the depth in those creek-bed eyes that told her he was not a boy playing at love, but a man who knew exactly what he was choosing. "Then let me be young enough," he whispered. She felt the words more than she heard them. They settled into the space between her ribs where the loneliness had lived for 7 years, and they filled it with something warm and terrifying and real. She wanted to protest. She wanted to list all the reasons it was impossible, impractical, and unwise. She wanted to tell him that people would talk, that her children would worry, that time would eventually turn her into an old woman while he was still in the prime of his life. She wanted to protect him from the future she could already see, the one where he would wake up one morning next to a woman with trembling hands and fading memory and wonder what he had done. But when she opened her mouth to say all of this, she looked into his eyes and saw something she had not expected. She saw certainty, not the reckless certainty of youth, which is really just ignorance wearing a brave face, but the earned certainty of a man who had already lost enough to know what was worth holding on to. And she realized that she was not protecting him by pushing him away. She was protecting herself. She was guarding the safe, predictable grief that she had built her life around, because grief, at least, was familiar. It did not ask anything of her. It did not require courage. Love required courage. It always had. She reached out and took his hand. She laced her fingers through his and held on the way you hold on to something precious when the wind is trying to take it from you. "You are a stubborn man, Jack Dawson," she said. He smiled, and the last light of the sun caught his face and made him look both ancient and brand new. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I have been told." They sat together on the porch as the sky turned from rose to violet to the deep, endless blue of a New Mexico night. The stars came out one by one, as they always did, indifferent to the small, enormous things happening below them. Somewhere in the pasture, a coyote called out to the darkness, and another answered, and the sound was wild and lonely and beautiful all at once. Margaret Ann Calloway leaned her head against the shoulder of the cowboy who had ridden onto her land with nothing but a good horse and a willing heart, and she let herself feel something she had not felt in 7 years. She let herself feel the future, not as a threat, not as a countdown, but a gift, uncertain, unpromised, and worth every single risk.